Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
Real Werewolf Halloween Tales. Beginning with the Halloween Werewolf of Wisconsin. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a Dogman encounter story, or maybe it's a sighting, but it's Halloween related. Actually, it's two different stories that happened on two successive Halloweens, which I'm thinking were 1988 and 1989. I would have been 22 for the first and 23 for the second, and still living with my parents. By 1991, I was married and out living with my husband in Michigan, but this was back in the late 80s before I met my eventual husband. Back then, I lived with my parents and my sister in Wisconsin in the country. Sis still lives there, but Mom and Dad left us years ago. So the first event was Halloween 1988, and I was too old to trick or treat. Also, I had no boyfriend, and so I was cranky and feeling sorry for myself. My sister is younger. I guess she was 16 that Halloween, but she had gone out trick-or-treating with some of her crazy friends. I was surprised when she came back earlier than I expected, but she told me there was an incredibly tall creep out there, wearing a very scary werewolf costume, and that she didn't feel safe outside. I had my own problems, and I figured she was just being a dramatic teenager, so I didn't really register any of this. I went back to watching some horror movie I had rented at the video store. When I heard a noise outside on the porch that sounded like bad news, I looked out the window and saw basically what my sister had been describing. I called her over and she freaked out, seeing the creature right outside, saying it must have followed her home. She ran upstairs and locked her door and window. But again, I just figured she was being dramatic. I watched this big guy outside for a while through the window, trying to figure out how he could see out of that costume. If the eyes were in the neck, then how did the head swivel around like that? How did it look like his eyes were looking around and blinking? It sure looked like a real animal more than a man in an animal suit. But there is no such thing as a werewolf, so it couldn't be a real animal. Right? As I watched, the big guy picked up a bowl of candies I had left out there, and started shoving them into his Halloween mask. At least that's what I thought I saw him doing. But then he turned to the side, and I could see that so-called mask chewing on the candy. He was licking it and chewing it and doing all sorts of things that you just can't do with a face mask, that's for sure. He was eating all our candy in the bowl. I banged on the glass and he dropped the bowl and ran off. Thankfully, it landed on some fallen leaves and didn't break. I went out and picked the candies up, but I had to throw most of them out. They had been contaminated and made dirty by that weird huge guy in the amazing werewolf costume. The next year, 1989, I was still an old maid stuck at home, but that season I got involved with a church group. They assigned me and another young woman named Pearl to lead a group of kids from the church on a trick-or-treating round, making sure that they were kept safe and that there were no razor blades in their candy or whatever. I had pretty much forgotten about the werewolf guy from the year before, until all of a sudden, he jumped out from between some trees and out onto the sidewalk in front of me in all these brats in cheap Halloween costumes. It was me in front of the line, Pearl taking up the rear, and all these screaming little memes that the dog-headed monster man in front of me started eyeing. Like he was looking at those little White Castle slider hamburgers, you know what I mean? Like he was looking at a whole Crave case of those, if you follow. In that moment, I could smell this guy's dog breath, and I could see into his dog mouth. That was no costume. That was a real monster dogman werewolf, as big as a grizzly. And he was about to eat the kids that I had been put in charge of. That meant I was going to get in trouble. I never got in trouble. The idea of this werewolf giant trying to get me in trouble caused me to fly into a rage. I screamed at that werewolf that he should pick on someone his own size. I took some hard candies and tossed them at his face, as I called him a bad dog. Well, I don't think it would work if I tried it a second time, but in that given moment, my gambit paid off. The huge Dogman made a sound like a puppy being swatted with a rolled-up newspaper, and he ran off into the woods, allowing us to get those little monster brats back to the safety of the church. That was enough Halloween for me for life, basically. That's the last time I've ever gone trick-or-treating. Since then, I barricade myself inside, preferably in a room with no windows. At the very least, the shades have to be drawn down. I need some warm covers and some spooky movies, and I just go to sleep early. In the morning, I go outside and assess the damage. After all, if you're hiding out and not giving out treats, sometimes you have to suffer from tricks. Still, for me personally, it's worth cleaning toilet paper out of trees every third or fourth year, as long as I never have to ever again look out there and see the Halloween Werewolf of Wisconsin. Say, some of you are aware that I missed a lot of time over the past month or two. I was really not doing well, and this bad stomach problem kept seeming to get worse instead of better. And then, and I swear this is true, I took a chance once I got paid from YouTube, and I bought a pouch of this stuff I found on the bottom shelf at Whole Foods. It's made of turkey tail mushrooms and ginger and other good things, and although I will say it is the worst tasting thing I have ever swallowed, I must also admit that it cleared up my stomach problem, which I've had my entire life, in about 1 hour. I only drank about a third of the glass, too. I've had bad digestion problems my entire life, which one doctor told me stemmed from my mother smoking while she was pregnant with me. Well, now I'm drinking some of this nasty tasting potion every morning. At first it burns inside me, but then I'm not sick anymore. To me, this is an absolute miracle, and that's why I wanted to share it with you. I realize I sound like a religious convert preaching the gospel, but you can't understand what a huge change this is, and how much more energy I have now either. If you're having this kind of an issue, you might want to check this turkey tail concoction by Four Stigmatic out. If you use the link in the description to buy online from iHerb, I think you get a small discount of a few bucks, and the channel here gets a small commission. But even if you get it from another source, the happy gut stuff this company sells actually works, at least for me. It solved a painful issue that I've literally suffered from for over a half-century. I don't know if it will work for you, I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but it sure is working for me. And hopefully that means more of me working for you, making new episodes. Thank you, Four Stigmatic. And now for something completely scary. My youngest son is a wolfman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I recently attempted a reunion with my werewolf son. We had maintained a level of contact, but I had not seen him with my eyes since the mid-1990s, and it is my hope that he and I never cross paths again. I'm too afraid of him. He's more animal than human. What happened was that I drove out to his trailer, which he had emailed me the location of. I wanted to see him for his 50th birthday and to bring him some of his possessions from his room that I still had. Our meeting went well until I brought up some personal thing that caused him to fly off in a rage. That was when I witnessed an anger-driven werewolf transformation, which is not something you ever want to witness while up close. I ran to my car and I locked myself in as he went ape on the exterior of my vehicle. I drove away weeping, as my own son behaved like a wild animal all around me. I had seen him change form once, 30 years prior, but this time it happened in the middle of the day in broad daylight. This was not him being forced to change. This was him changing himself, because he had so little desire left to control his own temper. It was the event that made me realize that I had to write this down for my own sanity, and that I needed a safe and anonymous way to share it that wouldn't drag my friends and neighbors into my personal family problems. I've been a lurker for some time on your channel, but I never comment. I don't listen to every show, but I catch you a few times a month usually. I've been wanting to tell my own story, which is a personal werewolf family matter, but I had been planning on sharing it with a larger channel than yours, no offense. However, going on Dogman encounters with Vic Cundiff or one of those other bigger shows means that I'd have to call in or go on Skype or FaceTime or something like that. And I just don't have the nerve to connect my voice with these stories, if that makes sense. I mean, even if they disguise the voices on those shows, you can always kind of tell who it is, at least if you know the person. If my family heard me talking about any of this, it would trigger a whole list of troubles for me and my relatives. For this reason, I'm just going to tell you my side of it and then entrust these stories to you. My writing skills are not exactly on par with Hemingway, so feel free to fix and fiddle with the narrative to make it work for your show. Just please don't change any of the details about the events or my family members. This is the story of my problem child, who we can call Morton. He was and is not my only son, but he is my youngest, and he is also my greatest disappointment. His late father never took a liking to Morton, and I tried to make up for it by loving him twice as much. It only made him a colder man once he grew into his teenage years. He had developed a reputation as a mama's boy that wasn't really his own fault. I tended to dote on him and be overprotective, but he tried to succeed on his own without my help. I say tried because he never did. Succeed, I mean. He failed whenever I didn't step in to pull some strings or help out in some way. And he never developed the confidence of my other boys, the ones whose father loved them. By the time Morton was a teenager, he had become a loner and into that Kurt Cobain grunge music. This was back then in the early 1990s, when that stuff was new. He would blast it annoyingly loud and get into equally loud arguments with his dad, who wanted it turned down. In retrospect, I understand why Morton fell in with those werewolves. I mean, it was a way to have power that he couldn't normally have. It turned him from a rocker nerd into into a super athletic rocker nerd. I mean, I think in his mind, him becoming a werewolf was like Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man, except that the werewolfism was and is a harder thing to control. It's difficult for me to tell exactly when my son first became a werewolf, because the entire family became distant before that. We had so little contact with Morton that it might have started when he was 17. I know for a fact, though, that sometime after his 18th birthday, he was no longer a normal human being. I didn't see him transform yet in those early days, but a neighbor who I trusted had. She had witnessed it happening in our backyard one night, and when she told me she was so sad about it, that I knew she wasn't just making up a story. Our neighbors were an elderly couple from Eastern Europe, and to them a werewolf was a very real thing. To me, however, a werewolf was something from legends and movies, so although I believed my neighbors' every word, I still wondered what they had actually seen. I mean, what could they have witnessed that somehow, in their Eastern European 20th century minds, got transformed into a werewolf sighting? That was my worldview in those days. Werewolves could not be real, but something bad was happening concerning my youngest son Morton. So I felt that all that needed to be done was for me to parse this information that I was taking in. The situation wasn't as complicated as I was thinking, though. The situation was simply that my son had somehow managed to actually become a real werewolf while still living in my house with me and his father. Both of Morton's older brothers had moved out by then, and I have to admit I did not feel safe living with a young man that my neighbor insisted was a shape-shifting man-eating monster. Once he started playing that grunge music, I knew something was wrong. I began reading up on what to do if it turned out that he was into hard drugs. I was completely unprepared for the eventuality that he might become a legendary man-wolf, craving human blood. It wasn't just that I didn't know how to respond to that eventuality, but I didn't even know how to understand it, how to comprehend it. You can't solve any problem that you can't wrap your mind around, and my mind was still too small to be able to cope with this situation and all that came with it. As a result, the three of us yelled and screamed at each other a lot, but there wasn't much listening, and there certainly was very little understanding. I do accept the blame for at least part of all that. But I also have to say that Morton is a piece of work. And he's made a series of life choices that to me are just indefensible. Like that rock band he went on tour with. That is where Morton's late father and I agree that the problems seem to begin. The band did get signed, but they only put out a single or two, I think. I forget the exact details, but they ended up never getting their album done, and they had to pay money back to the record company for almost 2 decades. Not Morton, though. He wasn't actually in the band. He was just their roadie. Morton isn't creative enough to learn to play an instrument, but he can usually manage to carry instruments from the tour bus to the stage and then back. That band he was roadie for toured the East Coast that summer, ending up in New Orleans in early October, and I think that was the location where our son was turned into a werewolf. I expect some of you are suggesting that I should just ask Morton where it all started. He is still alive, and I am still in contact. Well, let me tell you, I've been asking Morton to explain himself for his entire life. He just is not inclined to talk about himself. That was the way his father used to put it. Some people never stop talking about themselves, but not our Morton. He never ever tells a fish story. He never exaggerates. He never boasts. He just sort of glares at you and retreats into the shadows. My youngest son is one mysterious SOB. I beat around the bush long enough. I better get into some actual werewolf stuff now. I have to say, it still offends me that my son is what he is. Every time I talk about it, it feels like a new situation. But this summer makes it officially 30 years that we've been coping with this as a family. It isn't something I've ever gotten any more used to, even as I strain to understand it better every day. There was a period where my husband and I thought that we were being messed with by a wild animal, and in fact we even called it a Dogman. This was in Wisconsin, and people were talking about the Dogman locally. I don't remember if this was just before or just after the Beast of Bray Road started hitting the local news out here, but we had a number of friends seeing the Dogman before that happened, so for us at least, there was a Dogman buzz leading up to the Bray Road period of sightings. In retrospect, with what I know now, I wonder how many of those sightings might have actually been of werewolves, and not Dogman at all. My husband saw the monster first. I say the monster, but I'm talking about my own son. From a distance, he looked like a thinner and more athletic version of a bear. His coloring was wrong for a bear, though. The fur was a mix of brown and gray, and the way you see on canines like wolves, and the snout was longer than a bear snout usually is. That was also colored gray and brown, whereas bears have sort of a Caucasian flesh-colored snout. At least the ones I have seen in person did. This creature my late husband told me he saw was a thick-legged wolf that walked on its hind legs, tilted up like a man. It was not wearing clothing, and it seemed to be a wild animal, so we both classified it as a Dogman sighting in our mind. We didn't report it in to Linda Godfrey or anything at the time. We kept it to ourselves. In retrospect, with the way things turned out, I'm kind of glad we never went public. My advice for others being bothered by Dogman sightings would be to make certain that it is not a werewolf, and that it's not someone you know, before you go on the record as having witnessed a Dogman. This is not an ordinary situation, and you find that your life starts to have very different kinds of problems and stresses in it than it did when things were more ordinary for you. Our neighbors on the other side told us that they were seeing a dog that stood like a man on their property each morning, just before it dawned. And so I became curious and decided to get up an hour earlier one morning and stake out their backyard, and our own, with binoculars from an upstairs window in our house. That was the first time I had seen the Dogman myself, and I tell you it raised every single hair on my body up into the air, all at once. What I saw was a dog-headed man, covered in a fairly light-colored fur, moving through the bushes and trees at the edge of our neighbor's backyard, just as had been reported to us. and then I saw it enter into the woods behind our own property. At that point I lost sight of it in the binoculars, and I tried to catch where it had gone with my naked eye, but I couldn't. It seemed a minute or two later when I was startled by an upright figure heading out of the woods toward our backyard. When I put the binoculars up to my eyes, though, I saw that it was just Mort coming out of the trees and heading into our back door, just at dawn. He was fully clothed. He looked his normal grunge rock self, and I remember trying to figure out where he had been coming from. Did he have any friends on the other side of those woods, I wondered? But then I put those thoughts out of my head and I went back to looking for the Dogman. Later that day, I decided I'd better warn Morton about what we'd all been seeing. If he was going to walk around in those woods back there at night, he should know there was a large two-legged wolfman type of thing living back there. My hubby and I had been wondering if the Dogman would run from humans like they say Bigfoot often does, or if it might become aggressive or even deadly. Morton needed to know, and so I just blurted it out to him while he ate his Count Chocula cereal. I told him that I had seen this thing. His father had seen it too, and two of the neighbors as well. Rather than thanking me, Morton started quizzing me about what I had seen, demanding to know exactly what details I knew about this creature. Then he demanded I take him to the window that I had seen this from. When I brought him up there, he grew even more agitated, and he called the guest bedroom on the second floor my spy tower. He seemed to be offended on behalf of the Dogman, and he told me that everyone in my generation was, quote, nosy, unquote. Then he stormed off down to his room in the basement and began blasting grunge music at a decibel level that bordered on feeling like an earthquake. It was around this time that Mort's two older brothers started reading about something called an intervention. It was a thing that was sort of getting popular around that era. You would gather the family or friends of a person having a problem. You know, like a problem with addiction or violence or something. And then everyone would try to get the guy to realize that there was a problem so that he could start to deal with it. Sometimes it did wake people up, but other times it drove them over the edge. For instance, I read that my son's hero Kurt Cobain was confronted in this way by his band and his family, but his response was to fire the band and hire a divorce lawyer shortly before his untimely and controversial demise. So I'm not sure if what we did was good or bad, but it is a part of the history. It is what we did. So we had both Mort's older brothers and me and Mort's dad, and we had Mort surrounded. We didn't know what his problem was, but we knew he was troubled, and we needed him to open up to us so that we could help. That was essentially the message we were trying to go into this with. The longer the situation lasted, though, the more agitated Mort became. He kept insisting he had to leave, but each time he tried, one of his brothers would make him sit down again. Finally, Mort began screaming, and none of us could stop him. I thought he was bellowing in anger, but it became apparent that he was in a great deal of discomfort. We had first backed away, but then we moved forward to see if we could help. And that was when my youngest son, Morton, began to literally change in front of our eyes into some other kind of a creature. That was when Mort stopped being human. My son's eyes began to glow, not reflect the light like a cat, but to actually glow from within like a demon. I saw steam or some kind of vapor rise off of him, and I saw him bare his teeth, revealing that he now had long fangs. I don't recall a lot of the details that other witnesses talk about with werewolf transformations. I just remember noting that his teeth were long, and then noticing that his hands had become clawed, and then noticing that his arms were growing hairy. As I noticed each thing, my attention would be drawn to that, and then he would jerk or growl, and I would see that he now had tall dog ears up on top of his mane of grunge rocker hair. I can't say I ever saw the ears grow, I never saw the fur grow, but I would notice that they had just done so. Does that make sense to you? Okay, well if so, then explain it to me. How exactly had I witnessed a werewolf transformation as it happened, and yet also not really seen any of the changes until they had already happened, or at least not noticed them until they seemed to be finished happening? When he stood up again, Mort was bigger than before, and he was beginning to come out of his clothing a bit. Neither of his brothers nor his dad stopped him when he charged up the stairs howling and out the back door of the house. The family discussed what to do when Mort came home. Take him in, kick him out, call the police, hire a priest to bless some silver bullets. It never ended up mattering though, since Mort never did come back home. He and I started communicating again in 2009 via email, but only a few emails a year to let each other know that we were still alive. I did tell him when his father passed, but other than that, he writes me, and I respond in a day or two, after I've had some time to digest what he's just told me. It's all personal stuff. How he earns enough to subsist and survive. How he manages the werewolfism, how he keeps it separate from how he earns a living. It's all too personal to him specifically for me to share any of the details with you though. I don't want to talk about how he makes his money. It would be like outing him a bit too much, and that's not my job as his parent. I am grateful that Mort's two older brothers are still with us, and that they bring their families to see me during the holidays most years. This year we're all going to meet at one of their houses though. It's time to start letting them have their own traditions, enough of mine. It needs to be about the next generation, not the prior one. It isn't like I have any great wisdom to impart anyway. I have not been such a success at all, have I? No, I haven't. Because my youngest son is a wolfman. Hey everyone, Bigfoot here, and I have to say it's been a while. I was not feeling well enough to make episodes for much longer than has ever happened to me before. I apologize, but it seemed to be beyond my control. I wrote a short post apologizing for this, and I was surprised by a very generous donation from Rusty Reyes. In fact, it's 10 times our top monthly donation level. So for this channel and for this Bigfoot, Rusty's donation means more than I wish it did in these already somewhat desperate times. So we will continue to thank Rusty beyond just this one episode. Honestly, we can't thank you enough, man, and we will continue thanking you next episode. Normally, this is where we throw to Henry Lee Dogman, but instead, we've hopefully got a new song from the brand new album by the Scary Stories NYC Halloweentime Orchestra. If you like it, check the links in our description for more. We've got a whole album of them. This one is guest starring the Chibi Twins, performing their brand new release, Ghosts, Ghosts, Ghosts. Take it away, ladies.
I got ghosts up in my hissy. Open source keeps me busy. Got spooks, a whole city. I ain't no kook, I see the hate. Ghost, 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 shoot, shoot, shoot. Ghost, 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 you make me blue. Ghost, 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 shoot, shoot, shoot. Ghost, 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 boo, boo, boo.
Dogman, at the movie theater. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I have a really old Dogman story for you from the early 1980s, like around 1983 or 84ish. It happened in the city of Baraboo, Wisconsin, not in the woods. In fact, it happened on the street out in front of the Al Ringling Theater on 4th Avenue, believe it or not. So maybe it was a werewolf, not a dogman. He wasn't wearing clothing, so he looked like an animal in either case. If I could remember what movie we were going to see, I could probably get closer to pinning down the date when this happened. I could swear it was something with a G, like Ghostbusters or Gremlins, maybe Goonies. This was before the Ringling Theater became a concert hall, or at least before they changed it fully. I can't remember, they might have started having some concerts there around that point, but we went there to see a movie. It was somewhere around the middle of the decade. Oh wait, it was definitely 1984, because that was when I graduated high school. A bunch of us girls got together for a farewell dinner at a restaurant on 4th Avenue, where we got dressed up and told each other our plans for college and beyond. We decided we were adults, and we were very excited. But in retrospect, I guess we all had a lot of growing up still to do. So we had our dinner and then we went to the movies, and as we were leaving the theater, we were saying our big goodbyes to each other in front of the place. It was emotional. Some people were crying. I personally was a bit relieved, as I was in a rush to get out of Baraboo and the vicinity in those days. Before the crowd could disperse, however, someone screamed, and then everyone there erupted in panic. There was a tall dude, who at first I thought was pushing my girlfriends in the back of the pack. It turned out he was scaring the girls and they were panicking and running into each other, trying to get away from him. Now, if you are a normal person and you see a bunch of your friends screaming and running from an individual, you would then also endeavor to remove yourself from the presence of said individual who was causing all that ruckus. Well, not me. Not in those days, at least. I heard the screaming. I felt the pushing. And did I become scared? No, I got curious. I wanted to see for myself what was going on. I maneuvered my way through a whirlwind of friends and classmates who had all lost their minds. People weren't just screaming. They were sobbing. They were breaking down emotionally. And of course, this only served to make me more curious than before. By the time I got to see the fellow at the epicenter of all this, I am not sure what I was expecting. It wasn't this. I found myself looking at a man covered in fur, but not a man, really. His chest, his legs, his arms, he seemed to be a man. But his ankles, his feet, they were more dog-like than human. His hands were sort of clawed paws, and his head... well, his head was a lot closer to being a dog head than a human one. Suddenly I heard loud screaming coming from close by, and it dawned on me that this was my voice doing the screaming. Now I started freaking out just the same as the other girls, right there on the street, in front of the old Al Ringling Theater. It sure looked like a real-life version of a wolfman to me, but with more of a dog-like head than they show in the movies usually. My friends told me that it was the Wisconsin werewolf, though, which is more of a dogman, really. It's not supposed to change back into a human ever. It just stays in that werewolf form all the time. I can't understand how it got to downtown if it was a wild animal, though. If it were a werewolf, then it might be a human. Almost any human. It could have been someone passing through the area or someone living in one of the upstairs apartments on the block. It just seems more likely to me, given the place and time we witnessed that thing, whatever it was. I also don't understand its motivation. None of the girls said it had attacked them. Nobody got injured by it, only by trampling over each other. So I don't think it was there to eat us. It only yelled and acted scary, like it wanted to chase us off. But that would be turf-related behavior. And there's no way the sidewalk in front of a movie theater is the turf of any dogman or werewolf. That just doesn't make sense. Not very much about this story does make sense, though. I guess it was some kind of weird rite of passage or something. Another event that helped me finish off my childhood and get my adult life off to a start. It's funny. At the time we were all afraid for our lives, we were terrified. But writing this all down for you has brought back a flood of memories and nostalgia. How can I feel nostalgic for a night of horror? when a whole bunch of us felt we might be living our final moments? I don't know. Yet somehow I do feel nostalgic about Dogman at the movie theater. Dogman at the video store. Dear Scary Stories NYC, are you old enough to remember Blockbuster video stores? Well, I can even remember back before them. And I once saw and got freaked out by a Dogman or some kind of weird wolfman monster just outside a Blockbuster. The store I'm talking about these days is known as the last Blockbuster video in the world, located on Northeast Revere Avenue in Bend, Oregon. Back then, it was a fairly new one, less than 2 years old as far as I can remember. For those of you too young to know, before streaming services, you would go to a store to rent movies. At first, they rented and sold VHS and beta tapes, but by the time this one opened, I think DVDs were also around, which is a movie on a disc, if this history is all too ancient for you. So instead of scrolling through an online library, you'd physically walk through the aisles filled with empty videocassette boxes and choose your poison for the evening. When we wanted something obscure, we would go to this place downtown that was privately owned. But when we wanted the new releases at the cheapest prices, then we'd go to Blockbuster, because that was like the Walmart of video rental stores. Back then, I had been going to the one on 4th Avenue in Bend with my boyfriend for some time, and he would always get annoyed when one of the guys working in the store would get friendly with me. I didn't mind though. And when that boy and I split, I made it a point to clean myself up a bit and go visit the Blockbuster alone, see if that clerk there was still as friendly toward me as he had been before. I don't remember what time it was, but it was dark out when I arrived. I never made it through the front door though, because this big monkey man ran out in front of me. I say monkey man, but he really had a head more like a dog than an ape. I mean, I think it was the Michigan Dogman, but it doesn't really make a whole heck of a lot of sense if it was. I mean, there's no forest near that place. So I don't know how he would just show up at a parking lot for Blockbuster. People tell me he was a big guy in a costume, but he seemed too large to be a man to me. Still, it was dark, and I was taken by surprise. Is it possible he seemed larger to me than he really was? I just don't think it was a guy in a costume, but it's not like I know about werewolf costumes or what was possible back in the early 90s. I guess what I saw would be something you could see in a movie, but in real life, it seems pretty unlikely. Other people more recently have told me that it couldn't be a Dogman because it happened in Oregon. I'm not sure what to say in response to that. I mean, that's what mainstream people say in response to Dogman reports from Michigan and Pennsylvania. That animal does not exist here, so you either saw something else or you were hallucinating. Or you're a liar. There's always that possibility they hang over your head, if you dare, to tell a story about the Dogman. Well, my encounter itself was brief. I walked toward the store through the parking lot, and then, out of the shadows, this very large beast man thing ran over, looking a lot like the ones on your show, but dark. Like black fur, or at least fur that looked black to me in that dark parking lot. It was standing up on its hind legs like bears sometimes do, but the legs were too long to be a bear's. It was at least over 6 feet tall, possibly larger than that. I stopped walking as the creature bounded in front of me, and then it sort of raised its arms up like it was trying to make itself even bigger, as if I weren't scared enough of it. I didn't know what to do because I literally couldn't run in those shoes, and no way I was going to go barefoot in that parking lot at night. I might step on a nail or worse. So instead of doing anything, I stood there gawking. And then in the next second, someone burst out of the video store and started shouting and banging on the door. The Dogman shrugged right back down and skedaddled out of there. I couldn't see where he ran off to any better than I saw where he made his entrance from, but I was glad to see him go. The guy who ran out of the store to save me was not the guy I was there to see. He had that night off, as it turned out. This was the older guy who had saved my life. I probably at least owed him a favor or something for that, but, I mean, he was probably almost 40, so I just said thanks and I split out of there. I went back to that Blockbuster over this past summer just for nostalgia's sake. I didn't buy or rent any movies because I no longer have a VHS machine, And this computer doesn't have a disk drive. I got myself some good and plenty candy though, and some nonpareils. And when I got home, my husband and I put a movie on Netflix and played movie theater with our cats and our dog in the living room. And during pauses and bathroom breaks, I finally told my husband the story about Dogman and the video store.
The warmer's over, face of deer. It's that hoodie time of year. And you know times are never dull when you got the hoodie with the scary skull. Scary skull. Scary skull. Scary skull. Hoodie, scody, skull. Hoodie, skull. Scary skull. Pull over hoodie. Wear it till spring, it's a goodie. You can buy it without a prescription. Just follow the link in this video's description.
Dogman at the Punk Club. Dear Scary Stories NYC. I had an experience with a Dogman once back when I was a crazy punk rocker in the 90s. It was in an urban setting, there wasn't even a tree in sight. I was the only female in a band with 3 guys, and I was probably the most difficult member. I wrote the songs and I sang those, so the guys put up with me for a while. After about a year, I couldn't get anyone to play with me anymore, though. So then I had to grow up and get real, but this story is from back when I was partying every night, and then again the next day, and then again the next night, and so on. I was not only the loudest girl on the scene, I was the loudest human on the scene, and I was a real mess. Don't try this at home, kids. I was no role model. In my defense, however, I have to say that it was my loudness that saved my skinny pale butt on that night when I came face to face with the Detroit Dogman. My band and I toured the Midwest that summer and played a little club in the basement of a church rectory or something called St. Andrews, I think. I just remember way too many kids jammed into a tiny hot cellar. Then behind it was parking lots, and that was like the entire neighborhood. Just parking lots and a tiny 2-story church building with an insane punk club in the basement. I was pretty twisted at the time, and I only remember being there after dark because we were to go on after the main act. Our job was to play as oppressively loud as possible and make the crowd leave so they could lock the place up. It was kind of an insult to get that gig, but I took it as an honor. Those were the kinds of shows I enjoyed the most, when I could be as antisocial as I felt like being. That was my chief talent in those days. So we did our show, and it was one of our wilder ones, even though I can actually remember parts of it. The wildest nights were the ones I have zero memories of, at least according to what I hear people tell me. Afterward, the guys were packing up, and I was out back having a cigarette and trying to get ready for the long drive to the next gig. Like I said, it was just all these parking lots, but hardly any cars in any of them. There weren't enough buildings left to provide business for all these parking lots. And from off in the distance, I saw this big old guy walking toward us. I was thinking that my vision must be blurry, because I wasn't understanding what I was seeing as I looked over at this guy. And when he noticed me noticing him, he let out this loud bellow and started coming toward us faster, you know? The guys all stopped packing the gear and turned to watch this giant weirdo approaching. I told him to pack up faster and I stomped down my cigarette. Then I turned to that big guy and I copied his bellow or roar or whatever you want to call it. I screamed right back at him, just as long and just as loud as he had, but maybe an octave or 2 higher, that's all. Well, his eyes opened a bit wider for a second, and he nearly slowed down to a stop. But then that fellow appeared to become even angrier than before, and his approach got faster. I could see by now that he was bigger than any guy I'd ever known, but it still didn't occur to me that he might be too tall to be human. I was firmly convinced I was dealing with a guy, albeit a very large and strong one. My band told me later that would have been impossible. This guy must have been over 7 feet tall. I'm just glad I was too smashed to notice any of that at the time. So this creature guy, he had a kind of a boxer's physique, or maybe a mix between a fighter and a weightlifter, somewhere in between those two. I used to date a boxer, and I used to keep him in line by trying to be louder and crazier than he was. It did work for a little while, That's the thing about being crazy, though. It can work to your benefit in the short term. And then you start to think you can get away with anything all the time. Like on that night, I thought I could scare off a Michigan Dogman. Well, I guess that's not exactly true, since my skull was too thick for the fact that this was a Dogman to even get through to what I loosely refer to as my brain. I was just acting like I was fighting with my ex, but this guy was my ex times 2. So this werewolf Dogman thing, he screams at me, and Jeebus, if his mouth didn't look just like a wolf's mouth, like a real one. He looked just like some kind of mammalian dinosaur or something. But all I could think was, I need to yell louder than this mofo and put him in his place. So there I was, in this parking lot at night, screaming at a genuine cryptozoological monster specimen or whatever, and this guy was yelling on back at me. So you know how opera singers can supposedly break glass with the sound of their voices? Well, something about the combination of my voice and that Dogman's voice had a similar effect. All of a sudden, car windows cracked and shattered. Alarms started blaring from almost every direction. This freaked the Dogman out. Hell, this freaked all of us out. But the Dogman is the only one that ran away. Some of the windows of the club had broken too, and so we decided we better split out of there before we ended up having to pay to repair this church building that we didn't even break. At least, not on purpose. So if anyone ever tells you that the Michigan Dogman only lives in rural parts of the state, you tell them that this drunken out-of-her-head punk rocker says different. Dogman ain't some hillbilly yokel, no. He's a city slicker, see? And he's got some good taste in music, you hear? I know that because I met him after one of my own gigs, on the night when we encountered Dogman at the punk rock club.
What better than a waffle on your plate? A waffle on your head could be just great. It's the waffle bean from NYC. Scary fashion for spring, you see. Black, birch, camel, navy, mustard, heather, gray. One of these colors is just your way. Wear this hat and you'll be it. Link in the description for this vid. Get your own scary stories, waffle beanie today.
We thank her for her kind, sweet Karen. I'm talking about our EP Sharon. Please join me in thanking tonight's executive producer, Sharon Smirnoff. Sharon is a member of our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Spooky Tooth, the Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, when I was a kid, my family had our own personal local werewolf or dogman celebrity. We called him Spooky Tooth, which was the name of some kind of a hippie band that my father liked. Dad is who named our dogman or wolfman or whatever he actually was, but Dad wasn't the first to see it. In fact, when he gave the creature its nickname, I don't think Dad even believed that the thing was for real. I think he either thought we were all crazy, or that we were all joking around about the entire thing. It was the mid-70s when In Search Of was on TV as we ate dinner at night. Dad might have thought we were just watching too much Leonard Nimoy for our own good. The whole thing started with my younger sister, who I admit is a wackadoodle. She always lived in her own little fantasy world, and I never met anyone who didn't think she was a little insane. Well, except for other insane people, I suppose. My little sister and her friends are basically the psychotic leading the neurotic and schizophrenic. It's an ugly scene. So, when she started telling us that she was seeing a werewolf outside her window at night, we all just sort of laughed and ignored her. She will still to this day do absolutely anything to get attention, and she's sort of a joke, so nobody thought the werewolf she was seeing was real. I would ask my sister to add her opinion here, but she is not speaking to me because I won't vote how she tells me to vote. She also divorced her husband for this same reason, the lucky guy. Alimony schmalimony, he's lucky to be away from her. So anyway, Schizo's sister was telling everyone, that we had a werewolf problem, and we all successfully ignored her for weeks, maybe months. Then one night, I saw her staring out of her bedroom window at something, and she seemed transfixed. Being a brother, I saw this as a perfect opportunity to sneak up behind her and shout boo. But as I got close to her, I could see what had captured her attention outside. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I was seeing it. There seemed to be a big dog standing up on its hind legs out there. Either that, or a man in a werewolf costume. It was hard to tell in the dark. I was seeing a dog that looked a lot like a man, or else I was seeing a man that looked an awful lot like a dog. I wasn't really certain which, but neither of them made any sense anyway. The next morning I spoke quietly with my older and saner sister, who's around 2 years older than I am. I didn't tell her that I was certain I had seen the Wackadoodle's werewolf, but I told her I saw something weird, and I needed her help figuring out what it was that I'd seen. At first, the sane sister rolled her eyes at my request, but I pressed the issue. I told her that if it wasn't a monster, then it was a weirdo dressed up as a monster, and in either case, we should probably determine between the two of us whether our parents should be alerted about all this. I could tell she noticed how reasonable my argument was, but more importantly, if some weirdo, whether human or not, were hanging around outside our house while she slept, then sane sister wanted to know about it. So the two of us talked in a friendly way with Schizo Sis, and we all agreed to meet up in her room around 1:30 a.m., which was the time I had seen whatever that was up in her room the night before. The Wackadoodle seemed glad for the attention, and she was being cooperative. That night, though whatever it was outside and downstairs, shambled out of the woods behind our property at around 1:46 a.m., perhaps a bit behind schedule. Saner Sis pushed Schizo Sis out of the way, so she could command the window and get the best view possible. I heard her muttering some curse words that were new to me, and then she ordered me to go downstairs and get a closer look at the creature. A closer look? But what if it was a real monster, I whined at her. Sane Sis turned on me in a fury, and hissed something about how she told me to go look at the thing, not to let it attack me. I was out the bedroom door and heading downstairs before she could finish what she was saying. There were some things scarier than backyard monsters, and my older sister, when she was mad, in those days, she was one of them. When I got down to the kitchen and looked out the windows, I could see the creature out there in the back. It had darker fur. It was taller than my dad, and seemed pretty muscle-bound. I did not initially notice eye shine, although I did later on. In the dark, I found it hard to tell if it was a dog walking on its hind legs like a man, or if it was a man in a costume designed to make him appear to look like a dog walking on its hind legs. If it was a dog, it had the thickest legs and arms of any dog I'd ever seen, thick with muscles. If it was a man, however, then it had a head unlike that of any man I've ever seen. Without thinking, and not wanting to go back upstairs, still uncertain of what was in the backyard, I impulsively walked out the kitchen door into the dark night. And as soon as I did, the creature turned and looked at me. It felt like the entire world had ground to a halt when I looked over at that, whatever it was. It was then that I noticed the reflective eye shine was extreme. It almost appeared as though the eyes were lit up from within. They were that bright. Once I was back into the same yard where it was standing, I got a sense that this was a being larger than myself, larger than anyone I'd ever seen. It was probably too large to have been a human in a costume. It just seemed very unlikely. But if it wasn't that, then it must have been a bear, right? What else stands up on its hind legs and walks around? In the USA, I mean. It had ears up on top of its head. It did not look like a Bigfoot. I mean, it didn't look like anything but what my schizo sister had said it looked like a wolfman or werewolf. When the creature took a step in my direction, I beat it back inside, locked the door, and ran back upstairs. Sane sister and I decided to let our parents know what we had seen the next morning, which was when the Spooky Tooth nickname for the monster was born. Dad heard us out, then mocked me and Sane sis when he applied the name, but that name stuck. We all laughed at the idea of the monster being a celebrity named Spooky Tooth. I got named Spooky Tooth's #1 fan since I was the idiot who ran out in the backyard to get a better look at the thing. So we joked that I was asking it for an autograph. When my family would be mean to me, I would joke around that I was going to go live with Spooky Tooth, that Spooky Tooth would treat me better. Those were the days before attacking your fans became a thing, so I figured the monster would protect me. It was all joking around anyway. You know how sometimes you make up a voice for your family dog or cat, and everyone in the family does the voice when describing what the animal's thinking? Well, in our house, we all had this voice we did that was supposed to represent Spooky Tooth. It was a kind of a Tony the Tiger sort of a voice, but growlier and dumbed down. Tony was a cat, but Spooky Tooth was a big old dog, so he sounded sort of less intellectual than Tony, I guess you would say. This was kind of a coping mechanism allowing us to accept life with a Dogman lurking just outside. We created an ever more elaborate reality for the Dogman, our celebrity Spooky Tooth, that we were the groupies of and attempted paparazzi of too. We never did get a good photo, so in that sense we were not dissimilar from the people who chase celebrities, looking for an image to try to sell to the Inquirer. In our fictional imaginary world that Spooky lived in, he was walking home from exclusive nightclubs when we were seeing him in our backyard. We'd imagine the other celebs he might have been hanging with earlier in the night, which superstars he might have been having feuds with, and so forth. And this was all before we had convinced our dad to stay up late and get his own look at the real creature that all this elaborate fan fiction was being based on. When Dad finally saw that this was an actual something, and not an imaginary hallucination of my little schizo sister, his entire demeanor changed. Dad went on a security stint, spending a ton of money to rip up our perfectly good fence and replace it with a much taller one. Dad also installed an early security system which required us to remember the password we were supposed to say over the phone when the security company would call. We were forever tripping our own alarm and then forgetting the password. Nobody in the family was very good at security. There was a period where we all had seen the creature and yet Mom remained oblivious to it. She would humor all of us when we spoke about our celebrity monster friend, but I guess she was always too busy with the full-time job of being our mom to have had time to think it through. I know she didn't believe us, but I don't know why she thought we were all talking about the monster if it weren't a real thing. But she definitely did not believe us. And you could tell this by just how shocked she was when it came to be her turn to get a glimpse of old Spooky Tooth. And Mom got more than a glimpse of it, too. She had it cross the road in front of her as she was driving back from the supermarket one overcast, rainy afternoon. The road where this happened is one that we've all been on a gazillion times. But this was the one time that something strange happened. It's not really a rural road, but there is that one stretch of 2 or 3 blocks where there are no houses, and only the one cemetery is over there. That's where this happened, a little wild patch inside a fairly suburban stretch of road. The day was as dark as night, other than the occasional lightning bolt turning it into a bright day for a second or two here or there. Mom had started driving a bit slower when the rain started, and it came down in buckets right off the bat. There was no lead up to it. First it was not raining, and then the next second it was suddenly pouring. And then into this crazy scene walked the star of our show, our local celebrity himself, Spooky Tooth. Out of the woods and into Mom's heart he walked, stopped in the center of the road, and turned to stare at her as she slowed her car to a halt and stared right back. So now both of them were standing still in the pouring rain staring at each other, and this was a wasteful situation. My mother did not like to waste a single second of time or a drop of water. Waste not, want not is what she used to say. To her, the inefficiency of that moment in time would remain extraordinarily frustrating until the day she finally left us. So at some point the Dogman seemed to decide to come over and see my mom. This must have been a truly terrifying moment, seeing the huge Dogman walking toward her in the driver's seat. Still, as he approached, the Dogman moved further and further out of the center of the road, until Mom saw her opportunity and took her chance. Slamming her foot down on the gas pedal, Mom zoomed around and past the werewolf-looking animal man, and down the road toward our home. Well, from that moment forward, Mom became the one of us who talked about the creature most. Only she never quite got his name right. It was more like Spooky the Tooth and Toothy Spook and other near misses. At that point, once everyone in the family had witnessed the Dogman, he became firmly cemented into our family legend. But Mom's sighting was the last any of us have had of any cryptids in all the years since. These days, those of us still alive mainly remember the Dogman in his mythic form, as the famous celebrity who would actually cut through our backyard at all hours of the night. And that's the way I personally will always remember Spooky Tooth the Werewolf.
Spooky Tooth, he a werewolf, oh no, he's the awful man, but the full moon make him grow. Spooky Tooth, he likes to eat your cats, then he blames it on the Haitians and he has himself a laugh. Spooky, spooky, spooky Tooth, he like a scary hairy dude for sooth. Most peeps run from him, that's truth, but in the club, he's sitting in my booth. He a monster, true, but he be famous like the cookies, famous, aimless. His name's Spooky, it ain't shameless. If we all lost him, who can blame us? Spooky Tooth, he a werewolf, I know. He's the awful man, but the full moon make him grow. Spooky Tooth, he likes to eat your cats, then he blames it on the Haitians and he has himself a laugh. Spooky, spooky, spooky Tooth, he make a scary hairy dude for sooth. Most peeps run from him, that's truth, but in the club, he's sitting in my booth.
It's a week before Halloween and you still need a costume, or your wife or girlfriend does at least. Why not get this cool lady werewolf costume from Walmart and save $25 in the process? That cuts the price nearly in half. Check the link in the description for the costume. It's a limited time offer, and if you do buy it, this channel makes a small bit of change. And now for something completely scary. Dogman in Virginia. Submitted by Ella. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story for you that happened back when I was 9 years old. I saw what I think was a Dogman crossing the road. It looked in silhouette somewhat like a very skinny man, but it was not a man. It was a large canine. I think it was chasing something, but I wasn't sure because the sighting was at some distance. This happened in the country area of a town in the state of Virginia called Danville. The specific location is called Laurel Grove in Sutherland, Virginia, where I lived with my grandparents at the time. I always loved going for walks in the woods, and we have a forest behind and in front, continuing behind the house across the street from us. The house I lived in is close to the road. I was playing outside that afternoon, and at some point I went and talked to my uncle who lived with us. The two of us chatted and hung out up until it got dark. It was just light enough that I could still see, however. And as I was walking back toward the house, I saw something crossing the road. At first I thought it was a coyote, because we had lots of them in those woods. I stopped in the middle of the road and it looked right at me. I noticed it had yellow, greenish or orangish eyes staring me down. I was shaking, but I couldn't move at all, even though I was close enough to my house, which was on the bottom of a hill. I saw this thing stand upright on its hind legs and its eyes were fixated on me. I was shocked. I didn't know what to think. I still couldn't move a muscle because of the fear I felt. Then, unexpectedly, it grinned at me, and I saw its sharp teeth or fangs. Its head looked more wolf-like, but it was skinny, like how a skinny human would be. It licked its lips, which startled me, like it wanted to eat me. It felt like time froze, and I had a bad feeling about what was going to happen next. Suddenly, we both heard an animal running in the woods. The large creature turned quickly, so I know he heard it too. Then this wolf-like man looked at me like, "You're lucky I found something else to eat." Then it walked across the road, jumped off it, and landed on the ground on all fours again. Then it ran on all fours after whatever it was running away in the woods. After it was out of my sight and my legs unfroze, I ran inside my house and locked the door. My grandma came and saw that I was scared and asked what was wrong. I told her what I saw, but of course she thought that since I was a kid, that I was imagining it. I knew I wasn't, though. Then years later, I heard that they were called Dogman. Then I thought back to what I experienced, figuring that was what I saw. Except a lot of the descriptions were about them being kind of muscular, and this one that I saw was pretty skinny. I looked up similar sightings and I found one in Virginia, and there was one in Danville by a cop. The cop said he shot at one that had taken a woman's dog from her yard. She called the cops, and when the cops heard crunching noises, they caught sight of the creature in their flashlights. He said he saw that Dogman eating the woman's dog, that it got up and moved toward the officer. He shot at it as it was coming toward him, but then he told the woman it was coyotes that took the dog. And that's what he had to put in his report, too, that it was coyotes and not a Dogman. He's retired now. I actually talked to him. He told me everything. He regrets not telling the truth during his career, but he was afraid of people making fun of him. Some people who write you finish by saying they hope to never see the creature again. Well, not me. I plan on learning more about the Dogman and trying my best to see more of them. I just hope that I don't become their next meal. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.